All right, so we're going to be working with circles in the coordinate plane. The coordinate plane is like the XY axes, and we're going to be putting circles, drawing them in here. Now, normally in an XY plane, we would draw lines, like if you can recall y equals mx plus b, or like, let me give you an example, it might be like 2x plus 1. Maybe parabolas, like y equals x squared, or something like that. Those are those are the kind of the basic ones. But what you notice with these equations is, like when we graph something, there's always a y and an x involved. So other numbers are plugged in, but there's always a y and an x, always a y and an x, and then they create parabolas or lines and things like that. So my point to that is we're going to create an equation for the circle, and what are we going to see? A y and an x in our equation. So we got to come up with an equation of this circle. So the equation of the circle, we have, let me just pick a point on that circle. It would be an xy coordinate on the circle. And then there's a point not on the x, but not on the circle, but in the circle. So this point right here is not touching the circle. So it's got a little bit different coordinate here. What we would call this center of the circle, we call h and k. It's like an x and it is an x and a y. It's just h and k represents the center of the circle. Then what I know is that the length from the center to the outside, no matter which direction I go, is called the radius. So this is the radius right here. Well, I can find that radius, length, or distance by finding the distance between this point x and y and the center h comma k. So I'm going to use this distance formula to develop the equation of the circle. So here's my distance formula. And hopefully you recall this formula. It's really just, remember, the Pythagorean theorem, just kind of more official Pythagorean theorem. Well, in this problem, the distance would not be d, but instead would be r. So the length would be r. And then let me plug in. So the x value would be x minus h squared. The y values would be y minus k squared. All right, and then I'm going to solve this a little bit by getting rid of this big square root. Would mean I'd have to square both sides. It would cancel this out. It would cancel this square root out, though. So that leaves r squared on this side. And then this is almost done, but I want this all on the left of the equal sign, and I want the r squared on the right side. So I'm just going to flip the sides. It doesn't matter. You don't have to think about it. Just write it on the other side. Like that. And this is the equation of the circle. But what we need to know is what some of these things represent. The r is the radius, and the h and the k are the, hk is the center. When we look back up here, hk is the center of that circle. All right, I'm going to put this into our notes, and then I'm going to just practice for a second with it. So the things I want to point out is that xy is on there, hk is the center, and then the radius is the distance from the center to the outside. And then our formula is x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equaled r squared. So h and k are the center point, and r is the radius. All right, I'm gonna just do one quick example, and before you get to the practice problems here, you can pause if you need to look at that further. But let's just say I have a center at -7, 2, and a radius of 6. If I was to plug into this formula here, I would leave the x and the y. Remember, as I set up here, you have an x and a y always in the answer. So I'm gonna leave the x as x, but I plug in the h value as the center point. So that's x minus h. H is -7, so it's x minus -7 is gonna change to +7, the double negative, squared, plus y, which you just leave as y, minus k is the center y value, -2 squared. And so again, the minus is part of the formula. I know that is not -2, but the minus is in the formula, equals r squared. So 6, you don't put just 6 here, but you have to square it, and it becomes 36. Now, what that means is just by looking at this, if we had to work backwards, this number is not the radius, it's the radius squared. So you could see this number and get the radius by square rooting and saying the radius is 6. And here I can see these numbers tell me the center, but remember that the center, that problem is there's already a negative in the formula. So if you see plus on the 7, it actually came from a -7. The sign will switch every time. And if this is a minus in here, it means it came from a +2 on the original point, because the minus is already in the formula. So just remember that you can go backwards by square rooting this r squared, and to get these values, just change the signs, flip the signs to positive or negative, and then you got the center and the radius going backwards.